I never thought a river could almost take my life, or that a stranger would change it forever. 1 second. I was gasping, sinking into the dark water, convinced this was it. And then, rough hands pulled me out, dragging me onto the muddy bank. My chest burned, my body shook, and when I opened my eyes, a shadow stood over me. A cowboy hat, dripping wet boots, piercing blue eyes locked on mine. That's when everything I thought I knew began to unravel.
Everything changed by the river.
The river had always been my escape. In a small town like ours, where days stretched into one another without much change, the river was the only place that felt alive. It didn't matter if it was early morning, with mist curling off the surface, or the golden hour of evening, when the water shimmered like molten glass. The river always carried me away from the weight of everything else. I was 22 that summer, stuck in that awkward stage between boyhood and manhood, when people expected you to know what you wanted in life, but you secretly didn't. Most of my high school friends had scattered after graduation. Some went off to colleges in the cities, chasing bright lights and big futures. A few had settled down too quickly, married young, had kids, and now lived routines that seemed foreign to me. And then there were people like me, stuck. I worked on and off at the feed store, helped my mom around the farm, and made excuses whenever anyone asked me what I planned to do with my life. Truthfully, I didn't know. The only thing I did know was that when I felt that tightness in my chest, when the walls of our small house pressed too close, or when my mom's concerned eyes asked questions she never said out loud, I went to the river. The river didn't ask me for answers. It didn't judge me for my uncertainty or for the restless thoughts I couldn't put into words. When I slipped into its cold current, I felt weightless, like the part of me I kept hidden from everyone else could finally breathe. On most days, I'd swim until my arms ached, then float on my back, staring up at the endless blue sky. Sometimes I'd lie in the grass afterward, letting the sun dry my skin, listening to cicadas buzzing in the distance. The quiet wrapped around me like a secret, reminding me that, even in a world that felt too small, there were still places just for me. But that summer, I realized I wasn't always alone out there. It started small. Glimpses, really. A figure in the distance on the far side of the river, where the ranch land stretched across the hills. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cowboys were always moving cattle, fixing fences, doing work that never seemed to end. But this one, he kept appearing. Sometimes I'd see him on horseback, riding slow along the ridge, his silhouette outlined against the horizon. Other times, he'd be leaning on the fence, one boot crossed over the other, watching the land with a posture too steady, too patient to be casual. And every now and then, when the timing was too perfect to ignore, I'd get the prickling feeling that he wasn't just watching the land, he was watching me. I told myself I was imagining it, that he probably couldn't even see me clearly from that distance, that I was just some farm boy messing around in the river while he had real work to do. But then why did it always feel like the air thickened when I noticed him? Why did my pulse skip every time my eyes searched for that shape in the distance? The cowboy didn't move like the other men in town. He carried himself with a calm weight, like the land itself bent around him, broad-shouldered, tall, with a hat pulled low to shield his face from the sun. Even from far away, he had a presence that made the air feel heavier, and I hated how much I noticed. When I dove beneath the surface, the cold water shocked my skin, but my thoughts were always hotter. Did he see me swim? Did he see my body cutting through the current, droplets sliding down my shoulders when I pulled myself up onto the rocks? Did he notice the way I lingered on the bank afterward, lying shirtless in the grass, pretending not to care? It was innocent. It had to be. That's what I told myself. But then there were moments that didn't feel innocent, like the evening I came later than usual, when the sky was already turning orange. I waded into the current and glanced across the river out of habit, and there he was, sitting tall on his horse, not moving, just watching. For a split second, our eyes locked across the distance. My chest tightened. I broke the gaze quickly, diving under the water as if I could hide from the heat rushing to my face. When I surfaced again, sputtering, he was gone. But the way my heart thudded in my chest told me it hadn't been a trick of the light. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying it. That single second of his eyes on mine. It wasn't enough to mean anything, and yet it meant everything. Days blurred into each other. But suddenly the river wasn't just an escape anymore. It was an invitation, a place alive with the possibility of something unspoken. Every time I waded into its current, I caught myself wondering if he'd be there. Sometimes he wasn't, and I felt a hollow disappointment I couldn't explain. Sometimes he was, and I felt exposed in a way I wasn't ready to admit. It built slowly, like the heavy tension of summer air before a storm. And then came the day that shifted everything, the day that took it from silence and stares to something that could no longer be ignored. The rains had come hard the night before, pouring down in sheets that rattled the tin roof of our farmhouse. By morning, the river was swollen and restless, its surface churned into waves. Any sensible person would have stayed out. But I was 22 and restless, carrying too many emotions I couldn't name. Pride, maybe. Loneliness, definitely. A stubborn need to prove something to myself. So I went in. The water hit harder than I expected, pulling at me with a force that made every stroke a battle. My muscles burned as I pushed against the current, further and further out, ignoring the voice in the back of my head telling me to turn back. And then I felt it. The sudden drop, the bottom vanishing beneath me, the current surging like hands grabbing at my waist. Panic flooded me as I thrashed, gasping, swallowing water. My arms flailed, my chest screamed for air, and the river pulled me down like it had decided I didn't belong anymore. The last thing I remember before the water swallowed me was the distant blur of movement on the opposite bank. A cowboy hat, a man running, and then everything went dark.
Pulled from the current.
The first breath I dragged into my lungs was half water, half air, burning my throat like fire. I coughed hard, my body convulsing, until the taste of river silt finally gave way to oxygen. That's when I realized I wasn't on the riverbed anymore. I was lying on a muddy bank, the grass beneath me soaked, the world still spinning. Someone's arms were locked firmly around my chest, propping me up as if holding me together. The press of callous hands against my skin felt startlingly real, anchoring me back into my body after the river had nearly swallowed me whole. "Easy now," a low voice drawled, steady and commanding at the same time. "You're safe. Breathe slow." I blinked against the blur of sunlight until the shape hovering above me came into focus. Him, the cowboy. Up close, he was different from the faraway silhouette I'd built in my head. Broader, more solid, his shirt clinging damp to his chest where the water had soaked through. His hat was gone, tossed aside in the grass, leaving dark hair plastered to his forehead. His jaw was sharp, shadowed by the faintest stubble. And his eyes, God, his eyes, were fixed on me with an intensity that made me forget for a moment that I had almost drowned. "You all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, though it carried a weight that demanded honesty. I nodded, though my throat still burned too much to answer. My chest rose and fell rapidly, the memory of the current still thrashing inside me. He didn't let go. His arm stayed firm around me, holding me up like he didn't quite trust one could stay upright on my own. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt thick with something I didn't have words for. Gratitude. Shock. Something deeper, quieter, that hummed beneath my skin like electricity. Finally, he released me, his hand sliding away with a gentleness that left its absence just as noticeable as its presence. He sat back on his heels, catching his own breath, though he didn't seem winded. If anything, he looked steady, calm, like saving someone from drowning was just another part of his day. "You shouldn't have been in there," he said finally, nodding toward the wild river behind us. "Not after a storm like last night." I swallowed, finding my voice. I didn't think it'd be that bad. His brow arched slightly, not unkind, but with the faintest hint of disbelief. "You're lucky I was out riding fence." Lucky. The word stuck with me. Lucky that he'd been there. Lucky that his eyes had been watching, not just the land but me. I sat up slowly, hugging my knees to my chest, as if trying to hold myself together. My skin was cold from the water, but his nearness was warm, grounding. For the first time, I felt the difference between being seen from across the river and being seen up close. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly. It startled me more than it should have. "Ethan," I said, my voice raspier than I expected. He nodded once, like filing away. "I'm Cole." Cole. The name suited him, short, solid, no nonsense. I repeated it silently, letting it settle into me. The silence stretched between us, but it didn't feel empty. It was a kind of silence that hummed with unspoken things. My chest still ached from the water, but another ache bloomed quietly beneath it, one I couldn't name yet. He stood, brushing the mud from his jeans, then extended a hand toward me. His palm was rough, streaked with dirt, veins standing out beneath sun-darkened skin. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. Then I placed my hand in his. The pull was firm but careful as he lifted me to my feet, like he was making sure not to jolt me after everything. I felt small against him, though I wasn't short by any means. Cole stood a full head taller, his shoulders broad enough to block the sun. "You sure you're steady?" he asked. I nodded again, though my knees betrayed me with a faint wobble. He caught it instantly, his hand darting to steady me at my elbow. The touch was brief, but it left an impression like a brand. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, the roar of the swollen river filling the silence. I became hyper-aware of the mud streak in my chest, the way my wet jeans clung uncomfortably to my legs, the rawness of my breath. And yet, beneath all that, there was the undeniable awareness of him, his nearness, his steadiness, the fact that without him, I might not be standing at all. "Got someone waiting on you?" Cole asked after a beat. The question landed heavier than it should have. "Just my mom. She'll be at work till evening." He gave a short nod, looking out toward the hills. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it, that he'd just mount his horse, tip his hat, and ride away, leaving me with nothing but the memory of being saved. But then his gaze flicked back to me, sharp, almost searching. "You come down here a lot," he said. It wasn't quite a question. Heat rushed to my face, though I told myself it was from the sun. "Sometimes." He studied me for a moment longer, then glanced at the river again. "Be careful next time." With that, he whistled low, and his horse trotted over from the trees. He swung up onto the saddle in one fluid motion, the kind that spoke of years of practice, of belonging to the land in a way I never could. Before he turned away, his eyes caught mine one last time. Just a flicker, but enough to make my chest tighten all over again. Then he rode off, his figure shrinking into the horizon until it blended with the land. I stood there long after he was gone, the damp air clinging to my skin, my hand still tingling where he'd gripped it. I told myself it was nothing, just gratitude, just adrenaline from almost drowning. But when I closed my eyes at night, all I could see was him, his steady eyes, his strong hands, his voice saying, "You're lucky I was out riding fence." And deep down, beneath the gratitude, beneath the adrenaline, I knew something had shifted. Something had started that I couldn't stop, even if I wanted to.
Drawn back to the river.
I told myself it was a one-time thing, that going back to the river so soon would make me look desperate, foolish even, like I hadn't learned my lesson. And yet, 2 days later, I found myself walking the dirt path again, sneakers crunching against gravel, the late summer heat hanging heavy in the air. The truth was, the river had always been my refuge, the place where I could disappear without anyone asking questions. But now it held something else, someone else. And that thought pulled at me stronger than any current ever could. When the clearing opened up, the river still ran high from the storm, though calmer now. The grass where I'd nearly drowned still bore the imprints of that day. The scuffed earth where I'd coughed up water. The spot where his boots had pressed deep into the mud. Cole's presence lingered here like a shadow. I told myself I didn't expect to see him again, that I'd come just to reclaim the space, to prove the river didn't own me. But part of me, some restless, guilty part, scanned the tree line anyway. And that's when I saw him, not on horseback this time. He was kneeling by the bank, one hand trailing in the water as if testing the current. His hat shielded his face, but I knew that build instantly, the quiet strength in the way he carried himself. My breath caught. I almost turned back, the way instinct makes you flinch when you stumble into something too raw, too unexpected. But before I could, his head lifted. Our eyes met across the stretch of grass. He stood slowly, brushing off his hands, then gave the faintest tilt of his chin. A greeting, restrained but unmistakable. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Hey!" I called, my voice carrying awkwardly over the sound of the water. "Ethan!" He said my name like it wasn't the first time, like it already belonged to his memory. I walked closer, careful this time, as if the ground itself might test me. "You come back quick," he remarked, almost amused, though not unkind. Yeah, I admit it. Guess I wanted to make sure the river didn't win. Cole studied me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. Just a small curve of the mouth, barely there, but enough to send heat crawling up my neck. "Stubborn," he said simply. The word should have stung, but it didn't. Not the way he said it. We stood near the edge of the bank, neither of us speaking for a moment. The air was thick with cicadas, the sun bouncing off the water in shards of light. I found myself hyper-aware again. The weight of silence, the space between us, the steady way his eyes seemed to take me in without rushing. "Why are you here?" I asked finally. His gaze flicked to the river, then back to me. "Fence line runs close. Needed checking." Besides, he paused, like choosing his words carefully. "Didn't sit right, leaving you the way I did." That admission landed heavy in my chest. He hadn't just saved me and forgotten. He'd thought about it. About me. I shifted, trying to mask the way my pulse quickened. "Guess I should say thanks again." "Already did," he replied evenly, though the corner of his mouth twitched again, like he found my awkwardness faintly amusing. It should have ended there, polite gratitude and nothing more. But instead, we lingered. He asked me where I was from, and I told him. How my mom had moved us here after the divorce. How the town still didn't feel like mine. He listened quietly, nodding sometimes, his expression steady but unreadable. When I asked about him, he gave little pieces in return. He'd grown up here, worked the ranch since he was a boy. Didn't have much use for cities or noise. The more we spoke, the more I realized how little I'd truly known about him before. From across the river, he'd always been a distant figure, part of the landscape. Up close, he was something else entirely. Every so often, our eyes would meet, and I'd feel that same hum beneath my skin. Not overwhelming, not obvious. Just enough to unsettle me, to make me wonder if he felt it too. When I finally stood to leave, the sun had shifted low in the sky. I half expected him to mount his horse again and ride off without another word. Instead, he said, "Don't let the river scare you off." The way he said it, low, deliberate, sounded less like advice and more like something else, something I couldn't yet name. I went back again, and again. Sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't. On the days he was, our conversations grew longer. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to as unusual. But each word built something invisible between us, brick by careful brick. He'd ask about school, about what I wanted to do after. I'd ask about ranch work, about the land, about the horse he rode. We kept it simple, but beneath the simplicity, something stirred. There were small things. The way his gaze would linger a heartbeat too long before he looked away. The way his voice would drop softer when he said my name. The way silence between us stopped feeling awkward and started feeling charged. And then there were moments that unsettled me in ways I didn't know how to explain. Like the time I slipped climbing the bank, my foot catching on a root. Before I could hit the ground, his hand shot out, gripping my wrist. His fingers wrapped tight, steadying me. For a moment, neither of us moved. His hand stayed there, warm against my skin, until I found my footing again. When he finally let go, it was slow, reluctant almost. Or the time I caught him watching me. Not in conversation, not even close. I'd been wading barefoot in the shallows, the sun catching the water. When I looked up, his eyes were fixed on me, unreadable, almost heavy with something I couldn't decipher. The second he realized I had noticed, he turned away, busying himself with the bridle of his horse. But the image lingered long after. Each encounter left me more restless, more uncertain. I told myself I was imagining things, that he was older, distant, that whatever tension I felt was mine alone. And yet, some nights, when the house was quiet and sleep wouldn't come, I'd close my eyes and hear his voice, see his eyes in the sunlight, feel the ghost of his hand around my wrist. Something was shifting. Something was building, slow and inevitable, like a storm gathering far off on the horizon. And though I didn't know when it would break, I knew, deep down, that once it did, nothing would be the same again.
When silence spoke louder.
The days began to blur together. I'd tell myself not to go back to the river, that it was reckless, pointless. But each afternoon, my feet would wander there anyway, drawn like the tide itself. And more often than not, Cole would be waiting. Sometimes he'd be sitting beneath the tree, hat tipped low, chewing on a blade of grass like he had all the time in the world. Other times, he'd be riding the fence line, circling closer, as if pulled by the same force I was. Neither of us ever said aloud, but we both knew we weren't meeting here by accident anymore. At first, our conversation stayed safe. Weather, ranch work, school. I'd tell him about my restless dreams of leaving town, and he'd chuckle, saying the world was bigger than I thought and smaller than I imagined. He was careful, always measured. And yet, there were moments when he edges frayed, like when his hand brushed mine passing me a canteen, and instead of pulling away, his fingers lingered just a fraction too long. Or the night we both ended up at the river after sundown, fireflies sparking in the dark, and we sat in silence that felt so charged it pressed against my skin like heat. I told myself I was imagining it, that he was just kind, just protective, that what I thought I saw in his eyes wasn't really there. But then sometimes I'd catch him looking at me in a way that didn't feel protective at all. One afternoon, the heat was unbearable. I kicked off my sneakers and waded into the shallows, the cold water biting at my ankles. Cole leaned against a tree nearby, arms crossed, watching with that unreadable expression. "You're not going to drown again, are you?" he teased, though his tone was softer than the words. "Guess you just have to save me again." I shot back before I could think. The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. They hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. Cole's gaze flicked to mine. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Not quite a smile, not quite serious. Just something. I looked away quickly, pretending to focus on the current, my cheeks burning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment, his look, my words. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. And yet it didn't feel like nothing. The more time we spent together, the more my world outside the river began to feel unreal. School friends, family dinners, summer chores, they all blurred into background noise. The only thing sharp, the only thing alive, was those hours by the river with him. But with that came fear. Because if I wasn't imagining it, if what I felt was real, if what I thought I saw in him was real, then what did that mean? What line were we both inching toward without saying it? And what would happen if someone else noticed? It almost happened sooner than I expected. We were sitting by the riverbank, the sun dipping low, when Cole asked, "You ever think about what people see when they look at you?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He skipped a stone across the water, watching it bounce before it sank. "This town. Folks talk. They notice more than you think." I swallowed hard. "Are you saying they've noticed us?" His eyes finally turned to mine. "Not yet." The way he said it, steady, quiet, made my chest tighten. I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could, a voice called from the trees. "Cole!" We both jerked our heads toward the sound. A ranch hand, older, trudging down with a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. Cole was on his feet. In an instant, his whole posture shifting. Calm, casual, as if we'd just been talking about nothing. Fence broke again. The man said, eyeing me briefly before turning back to Cole. "On my way." Cole replied smoothly, tipping his hat. The man disappeared as quickly as he'd come, but the damage was done. My pulse hammered in my throat. For the first time, I realized how thin the line was between what we had here, whatever this was, and the danger of someone else seeing it. Cole glanced back at me, his jaw tight. "You should head home." I nodded, throat dry, unable to speak. I didn't sleep that night either. My mind replayed the close call, the tension in his voice, the warning in his eyes. But beneath the fear was something else, something I couldn't name, without shame curling in my stomach. Thrill, because as much as it scared me, it also made me realize that whatever was happening between us was real. Real enough to be seen. Real enough to be caught. And once you realize that, you can't go back. The next time we met, something had shifted. The silence between us was heavier, tighter, as if both of us knew we were standing on a fault line. I tried to act normal, cracking a joke about how clumsy I was, but the laugh didn't reach my chest. He tried too, asking about school, but his voice was lower, slower, like his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. At one point, I bent to tie my shoelace, and when I looked up, he was staring again. Not the guarded, steady look he usually gave. This was different. Bear. For a second, neither of us moved. The air felt too thick to breathe. Then, just as quickly, he turned away, running a hand through his hair. "You should be careful," he muttered. "Careful of what?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted. "Of what you don't understand," he said, not looking at me. The words stung, but underneath, I heard what he wasn't saying, what he couldn't say. And it left me both terrified and more drawn to him than ever. That night, lying awake again, I realized something with bone-deep certainty. Something had to give, because we couldn't keep circling like this, pretending the river was just a meeting place, pretending the silence wasn't screaming louder than our words. A moment was coming. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but I knew it was closer than either of us was ready for. And when it came, everything would change.
The line we couldn't see.
The following week, I tried avoiding the river. I threw myself into chores, into meaningless distractions, telling myself that if I stayed away long enough, the feelings would fade. But the truth was, I couldn't focus on anything. Even when I stacked hay or scrubbed mud from my boots, I'd catch myself glancing toward the hills, toward the place where the river wounds way like a secret vein through the land. I lasted 2 days. On the third evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, my feet carried me there again. And of course, he was already waiting. Cole leaned against a tree, his hat tipped back, eyes half closed as if he'd been listening to the hum of cicadas for hours. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He didn't frown either. His expression was unreadable, but his shoulders loosened just a fraction, as though he'd been holding a weight he couldn't put down until I arrived. "Thought you quit this place," he said quietly. I tried. I admitted, stepping closer. Didn't work. His eyes lingered on me a moment longer than they should have. Yeah, me neither. We didn't talk much that evening. Instead, we sat side by side, watching the river flow. Every so often, my arm would brush his just barely, and I'd feel my pulse jump in my throat. He didn't pull away, but he didn't move closer either. It was torture, the kind you don't want to end. At one point, he reached for his canteen. His fingers grazed mine as he handed it over. The touch was nothing, just skin against skin for the briefest second. But my body reacted as if it were everything. I forced myself to drink, hoping he wouldn't notice the tremor in my hand. When I passed it back, his fingers lingered this time. Not an accident, not a slip, a choice. I froze, breath caught in my chest. And then he pulled his hand back quickly, as if the decision had burned him. His jaw clenched. He looked away. "Be careful," he muttered again, the same warning as before. But this time, it sounded less like advice and more like a plea. The next day, something shifted further. I'd stopped by the ranch with some tools my father had borrowed, and as I walked past the stables, I caught sight of him. Cole was inside, brushing down his horse. His sleeves were rolled up, muscles taut, skin glistening with sweat from the afternoon heat. He hadn't seen me yet, and for a long moment, I just stood there, watching. I hated myself for it, for how badly I wanted to step closer, for how much my body ached just looking at him. And then, as if he'd felt my gaze, he turned. Our eyes locked across the dimly lit stable. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. But something passed between us in that silence, heavier than words, sharper than the sound of the brush in his hand. Then footsteps. I flinched as another ranch hand appeared at the far end, carrying a bale of hay. Cole immediately turned back to his horse, his movements casual, practiced. I forced myself to keep walking, heart pounding so loud I was sure someone could hear it. That was the second close call, and it scared me more than the first, because this time I realized how impossible it would be to explain if anyone saw us staring like that. A few nights later, it happened again. We'd met by the river after dark, both of us restless, unable to stay away. The air was thick, the cicadas louder than usual, the moon bright enough to silver the surface of the water. We didn't sit this time. We stood close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He said something about work. I said something about school. Neither of us was really listening. At one point, I stumbled over a rock, nearly slipping. His hand shot out instantly, gripping my arm, steadying me. And for the first time, he didn't let go right away. His fingers stayed wrapped around me, firm, grounding. My breath caught, the world narrowing to that single point of contact. Slowly, I lifted my eyes to his. He looked down at me, expression tight, guarded, but beneath it, something raw flickered, something dangerous. "Cole," I whispered, though I didn't know what I was about to say. That's when the crunch of leaves shattered the moment. We both snapped our heads toward the sound, hearts hammering. A deer darted past the trees, quick and silent, vanishing into the dark. But the spell was broken. Cole dropped my arm as though burned, stepping back quickly. His chest rose and fell in sharp bursts. "We shouldn't," he began, voice rough. Then he cut himself off. I didn't push him. I couldn't. My throat was too tight. But I knew we were closer than ever to a line we couldn't uncross. The following days were torture. I tried keeping busy again, tried convincing myself it would fade. But every moment without him felt hollow. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his hand on my arm, his eyes locked on mine, the silence between us thick enough to drown in. The next time we met at the river, neither of us bothered with small talk. We just sat there, side by side, the air between us thrumming with everything unsaid. At one point, I finally whispered, "Do you ever think about it?" He turned his head slowly. "About what?" I swallowed hard. "About us." The word hung between us like a spark, threatening to set everything on fire. For a long moment, he didn't answer. His jaw worked, his eyes locked on the river. Finally, he said, "You don't know what you're asking." "I think I do," I whispered back. He turned then, really turned, his eyes burning into mine with an intensity that made my chest ache. For a second, I thought he was going to say it, admit it, break the silence once and for all. But then, just like before, he pulled back. "You should go home," he muttered. I wanted to argue, to push, to demand the truth, but the words died on my tongue. So I left, but as I walked away, I knew the dam was about to break, and when it did, neither of us would be ready for flood.
The edge of no return.
The night it finally happened, the air felt different. The heat of summer had broken into something softer, cooler. The stars shone sharp as broken glass above us, and the river's current carried more than water. It carried weight. I hadn't meant to find him that night. I told myself I was going for a walk, just to clear my head. But my footsteps led me to the riverbank anyway. And of course, he was there. Always there. This time, though, he didn't greet me. He just stared out across the water, his hat resting on the ground beside him. His shoulders were tight, rigid, like he'd been fighting a war inside his chest all day. I sat down beside him. Neither of us spoke for a long while. The silence was heavy, but not empty. Finally, I whispered, "You've been avoiding me." His jaw flexed. Maybe I should. The word stung more than I expected. "Why?" "You know why." I looked at him, waiting, begging silently for more. But he kept his gaze fixed on the dark water. I almost gave up. I almost let the silence drown us both. But then he turned suddenly, eyes locking with mine. There was something wild there, something desperate. "You don't get it," he said, voice low, trembling. "I think about it all the time, and it scares the hell out of me." My chest tightened. "So do I." His breath hitched, audible in the night air. For a moment, I thought he might finally say it, whatever it was. But instead, he clenched his fists and looked away again. "You shouldn't." Too late, I whispered. The tension was unbearable. Every inch of me screamed to reach out, to touch him, to break the silence with something real. And then, without warning, I did. My hand brushed against his, barely at first. Just a test. He didn't move. So I let my fingers rest against his. Still nothing. His breathing grew rougher, uneven, but he didn't pull away. The current of the river filled the silence. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. And then, slowly, painfully slowly, he turned his hand, lacing his fingers through mine. The world fell away. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could feel was the warmth of his hand in mine, solid and trembling at once. For a few endless seconds, we stayed like that. Two shadows on the bank. holding on to something that could never exist in daylight. Finally, he whispered, "God help me," and he leaned in. The kiss wasn't sudden. It was tentative, broken, almost frightened. His lips brushed mine like a secret he wasn't supposed to tell. I froze, not because I didn't want it, but because I wanted it too much. Then, like a dam giving way, I kissed him back. The world tilted. My chest ached, my stomach flipped, and every nerve in my body screamed alive. It was clumsy, messy, more about need than skill. But it was real. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads touched, breaths ragged. "This is wrong," he muttered, voice rough. "I don't care." He flinched at my words, as if they cut him deeper than he expected. "Someone could have seen us," he said, glancing around the trees. His voice shook. "If anyone finds out—" "They won't," I interrupted. My voice was too firm, too desperate. "We're careful." But even as I said it, I felt the danger thrumming in my veins. Because I knew the truth. Nothing about this was careful anymore. The days after that kiss were impossible. We didn't talk about it. Not once. But every look, every silence, every accidental touch carried more meaning than words ever could. At the ranch, I'd catch him watching me across the yard. He'd look away the moment our eyes met, but not before I saw the fire in his stare. At the store in town, I brushed past him in the aisle. Our shoulders touched for half a second, and it felt like a spark had lit the whole place on fire. At home, I lay awake at night, replaying every second of that kiss until my chest ached. It was everything, and it was tearing me apart. The breaking point came one afternoon. I'd gone down to the river early, thinking maybe I could be alone with the memory of him. But when I arrived, he was already there. He looked rough, more tired than I'd ever seen him. His hat was pulled low, his shirt wrinkled, his hands restless as they picked at the grass beside him. When he saw me, his expression flickered between relief and torment. "We can't keep doing this," he said the moment I sat down. "Doing what?" I asked softly. He gave me a look, sharp, pained, filled with everything he couldn't say. "You know." I swallowed hard. "So you regret it?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. "Cole," I whispered, voice breaking, "just tell me the truth." His hands tightened into fists. "The truth is, I don't regret it. Not one damn bit. But I should." The words hit me like a knife and a bomb all at once. I moved closer without thinking. Too close. His body stiffened and loosened as if he'd stopped fighting. "I don't regret it either," I whispered. The silence that followed was thick enough to crush me. His eyes darted to mine, full of something raw, unspoken, dangerous. And then, once again, he kissed me. Harder this time. Fiercer. Like he was drowning, and I was the only thing keeping him alive. But then, the sound. A branch cracked nearby. We both froze, lips still pressed, hearts racing like gunfire. Cole pushed me back, so quickly it almost hurt. His eyes scanned the trees, wild, panicked. "Who's there?" he called, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard. No answer, just the whisper of wind through the leaves. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe not. We never found out. But the danger was too close. Too real. When his eyes met mine again, the fear in them was unmistakable. "This is going to destroy us," he said hoarsely. And for the first time, I didn't have an answer, because maybe he was right.
The night everything broke.
The night of the storm was a night I knew nothing would ever be the same. It had been hanging heavy all day, thunderclouds rolling across the wide Texas sky, air thick with the smell of rain. On the ranch, everyone was on edge, animals restless, the workers quiet. Even Cole kept his distance, though every time I caught his eyes across the yard, the weight of everything we hadn't said pressed down on me like a storm of its own. By dusk, the rain came hard. Sheets of water, hammering the earth, blurring the world into streaks of gray. I thought maybe that was good. Rain meant privacy. No one would wander out to the river in weather like this. But of course, that's exactly where I went. And that's where I found him. He was standing under the old cottonwood tree, rain soaking him through. Hat gone, shirt clinging to his skin, hair plastered his forehead. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just stared, like maybe he'd known I'd come. Cole, I said, breathless, though I'd hardly run. His jaw tightened. You shouldn't be here. You either. We both knew what we meant and what we didn't. For a long moment, we just stood there in the rain, the storm pounding all around us, louder than our thoughts. Then, slowly, he stepped closer. Do you have any idea what you're doing to me? His voice was low, almost a growl, but it shook. I swallowed hard. Do you have any idea what you're doing to me? That broke something. His hand shot out, grabbed the back of my neck, pulled me in. The kiss was nothing like the first two. This one was fire and thunder and fury all at once. His lips crushed mine. His body pressed hard against me, desperate and trembling. I clung to him, matching the storm above us, letting it drown every shred of fear. For a few reckless minutes, nothing existed but us, the rain, the taste of him, the way his hand shook against my skin. When we finally pulled apart, we were both gasping. His forehead rested against mine, his breath hot even in the cold rain. This is gonna ruin me, he whispered. Then let me be ruined with you, I said. His eyes flicked up to mine, wild, searching. Then, without another word, he dragged me deeper under the trees, away from the open bank. We ended up in the old bar near the edge of property, a place half forgotten, its roof leaking but intact enough to keep most of the storm out. Inside it was dark, the smell of hay and damp would thick around us. The only light came from flashes of lightning through the cracks in the boards. Cole slammed the door shut, leaned against it like he was holding back the whole world. His chest rose and fell, heavy, ragged. This is wrong, he muttered again, like he was trying to convince himself. But when I stepped closer, when I touched his arm, he didn't move away. It doesn't feel wrong, I whispered. Lightning lit the barn, and in that split second, I saw the war on his face, the guilt, the hunger, the fear. And then he closed the distance, kissing me again, harder, rougher, like he was past the point of no return. This time, I kissed him back without hesitation. My hand slid up his chest, his arms, into his soaked hair. His hands gripped my waist, then my back, pulling me so close I thought we might fuse together. The storm raged outside. Inside, it was just us, two men colliding in a secret too big to contain. We collapsed onto a pile of hay, breath sharp, hands roaming like they'd been waiting years. Every touch burned, every kiss deepened the ache in my chest. Say it, I gasped between breaths. He froze, lips hovering over mine. Say what? That you want this. His eyes shut tight. His whole body trembled. And then, finally, he said it. I want this. God help me, I want you. The words cracked me open. I pulled him down into another kiss, and the rest blurred into the storm. When it was over, we lay tangled in the hay, the rain still hammering on the roof. The world outside washed clean, but inside, the air was heavier than ever. Cole sat up first, running a hand through his soaked hair. He wouldn't look at me. His shoulders were hunched, tense, like the weight of what we'd just done was crushing him. Don't. I whispered, reaching for him. Don't shut down on me now. His jaw clenched. You don't understand what this means. Then explain it. He looked at me then, eyes blazing with something between fear and love. If anyone finds out, it won't just ruin me. It'll ruin you too. Do you get that? I don't care, I said. And I meant it. But he shook his head, standing up, pacing like a caged animal. You say that now. But when the whispers start, when people look at you different, when your family, my family doesn't get to decide who I am. That stopped him. For a long time, he just stared at me, like maybe he wished he could believe that too. Finally, he whispered, You'll regret this someday. I stood, walked to him, took his face in my hands. The only thing I regret is not being brave enough to choose this, to choose you. His lips parted, his breath caught. And for just one fragile moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Then the barn door creaked. We both froze, turning toward the sound. A shadow moved just outside the boards. A flash of lightning lit it up, a figure, standing still, watching. My blood ran cold. Cole swore under his breath, pushing me back, his body snapping rigid. Who's there? He barked, voice sharp, desperate. No answer, just a storm. The figure shifted again, then disappeared into the rain. We were left in silence, both of us trembling. Cole turned to me, eyes wide, face pale. Someone saw. I swallowed hard. We don't know that, but we both knew it was possible. Maybe even likely. This is over, he said, voice breaking. We can't do this again. The word sliced me open. You don't mean that. His face twisted, torn between need and terror. I have to. And before I could stop him, before I could reach for him, he stormed out into the rain. I stayed in the barn for what felt like hours, the storm outside finally dying into silence. But inside me, everything was louder than ever, the taste of him still on my lips, the weight of his body still pressed into mine, the fear of that shadow still burning in my chest. I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever go back to the way it was. The storm had passed, but the real damage was just beginning.
After the storm.
The storm ended, but the silence it left behind was worse. For days, I didn't see Cole. On the ranch, he avoided me with a precision that felt rehearsed, always busy, always gone before I arrived. If our eyes met, he looked away so fast it was like I'd imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't imagined it. My body still remembered the press of his lips, the heat of his hands. My heart still beat faster whenever his name was whispered. And yet, there was also the shadow, that figure outside the barn. The thought of someone seeing us, knowing, wrapped around my chest like barbed wire. One evening, I found him by the stables, fixing a broken latch. I stood there too long before I spoke. Cole, his hands stilled, but he didn't look up. We can't pretend it didn't happen. My voice cracked. Finally, his eyes met mine. They were full of something raw. Fear, longing, regret, all tangled together. Yes, we can, he whispered. For your sake. For mine, it has to stay buried. The finality of his tone cut deeper than the storm ever could. I nodded, even though every part of me wanted to scream. I walked away, carrying the weight of something too heavy to set down. And I realized then, some stories don't end with closure. Some loves don't survive the light of day. But they mark you all the same. Forever. Tell me one word that describes how this story made you feel. Lonely, exposed, heartbroken, understood. If you've ever carried a secret love, share your story below. You never know who might need to hear it. And remember, not every ending is truly an ending. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of something darker. Because my next story starts with this line. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw him standing over me, holding something in his hand.